In this CBC News Extra, we bring to you Prime Minister Mia Amor-Mottley's May Day address at Solidarity House.
I've come really to complete a process. This is my first May Day as Prime Minister of Barbados, and I am deeply humbled, truly, to be here. But I've come to speak in a very reflective tone because I want us to leave here with one thought in our heads, that we must continue to do better in order to be the best. And it is against that background, I have no difficulty in being the person who tries to do better so that you one day may be the best female Prime Minister. But it isn't only you and me that I want to do better. It is a country that is made up of people. And the majority of us are workers. And I am pleased, more than anything else, to be associated with a political movement, because it isn't only a party, but a political movement that was spawned in the Caribbean 80 years ago, 81 years ago, that gave birth to the collective framework that saw people come together to represent themselves in every respect, and the most important of which for the average worker was as a union. And that this could be done, General Secretary, less than 20 years after the formation of the International Labour Organization, shows that on this small rock, from this small place, we have been in the vanguard of the improvement of the rights of workers and fighting always for decent work and for rights to be accorded to our people, because we know that each and every one of us was created in the image of God, and each and every one of us has to have the dignity and the agency of an individual that must be respected by all. That Grantley Adams could have been there with other men, and I dare say women, even though history does not record the women who worked with them at that point. That Sir Hugh Springer, that Frank Walcott, that these men could have laid the foundation for the first 50 years of this great organization, the Barbados Workers' Union, is perhaps one of the strongest platforms on which we could have stood as a people as we emerge from the bowels of colonialism and the bowels of exploitation as a people. And I know that there is very much an attitude of celebration today as we celebrate Workers' Day. But I've come here today not only to celebrate, but to remind us that we have to give thanks, and we have to remember what causes us to be in this space at this time, in this moment today. And as we do so, we recognize that there are some key lessons that remain unchangeable, immutable. The power that we must find in ourselves, the courage that we must look for in each and every one of our bosoms, whether as a worker or whether as a leader, whether as a unionist or whether as a supervisor or manager, whether as a politician or as a constituent. We have to come to grips with the reality that there is power in each and every one of us. And if that power is not used and not nurtured, it will not be of any use to anybody. We have to come to grips with the fact that we have to speak truth to power. And I am the first to tell you and to tell everyone that I don't want a bunch of yes people around me. Never have. And I think that your General Secretary, who speaks her mind frankly, as well as some of the others that I see in this audience representing the labor movement, that the ability to speak honestly, truthfully, but respectfully, honestly and truthfully, but respectfully, must always be the hallmark of the building of our social partnership in this country. And I go further, that the ability to temper the exercise of power, recognizing that the blatant and raw display of power only diminishes power and diminishes the person so exercising it. And it is against that background that perhaps the best example of that in the history of the modern history of this country, outside of the class of political leaders, has been the leaders of the union movement. And to Sir Frank Walcott, and to Sir Grantley Adams, and to Sir Hugh Springer, we add, of course, Sir Roy Troutman, who also understood and learned from them that the greatest display of power comes not through the raw exercise of it, but the use of that power to influence, to nudge, and to be able to create the outcome that is in the interest of all on a sustainable basis. And I have every confidence that your General Secretary, standing as she does, as the first woman, but the fourth General Secretary of this great movement, appreciates that power. I will share with you my full appreciation of it, which is not just as a student reading a book of history. But I remember as a young girl speaking to Sir Hugh Springer, who was at the center of the discussions behind the scenes with the then major problems that there were, that the workers' union was going through in the early 1980s. And I can remember it like if it was yesterday. I was a teenager, and he said to me that Barbados will never appreciate the genius of the man called Frank Walcott, who understood that his greatest contribution to the development of workers was to the development and stability of the country Barbados. Because if the country was stable and if the country was developed, then the country would carry the workers along, because we were a fair people and a people who respected social justice. My people have never forgotten it. And I have seen others come and act in similar vein. I've seen the example of Sir Roy Troutman in the early 1990s, when this country was put on its knees. And when, in a choice as to how we rebuild, Sir Roy chose to be able to do so in a balanced way, recognizing that without country, the workers have nothing. But that at the same time, that you must never forget who made the sacrifice to stabilize the country. I have seen it now in living color with those who constitute the social partnership. And I made a commitment, and it is one from which my government will never resile, that the basis of the best governance that we can bring to our people is to work together and to work collectively. I have heard you, young man. And it is against that background that I ask you to judge my government not by our words alone, but by our actions. Because on the very first morning after being swearing in a government and a cabinet at Bay Street, the very first meeting of this government was with the Social Partnership of Barbados, because we recognize that labor and capital and the government and the executive must work collectively to take us out of the bowels from which we were languishing after a decade, a lost decade in this country. But it wasn't, and it has not only been about meeting once or twice or three times for the sake of it. Every major decision, whether it is in the context of national security, whether it is in the context of the growth and development opportunities for this country that I will share with the country by the end of the month in greater detail, whether it is in the context of the difficult moments and decisions, like when we had to continue to work out how we are going to balance the adjustment, it has been a joint decision. And these words would seem to be words to those who have an agenda that is contrary to the growth and development of this country. But I've come here today to defend the social partners because it seems as though, for some, patriotism is now to be abused. And it seems for some that the ability to put the country's interests first, to determine that the most important task that every Barbadian faced less than a year ago was to save our dollar, to save our quality of life. It seems as though that is now to be trivialized, and that persons who acted in pursuit of that noble cause are now to be humiliated and to be viewed as lackeys or pawns, rather than to be viewed in the light of the legacy of Hugh Springer, Grantley Adams, Sir Roy Trotman, Patrick Frost, and others. We have a proud legacy. And it is not everything that we will agree upon. And I have every expectation that I might get a lash or two from your General Secretary today. Because to be the best, we must continue to do what? To do better. But doing better isn't only about workers, it's also about the government. It's also about us as individuals. And I say more and more to Barbadians that we can be the best that we can be when we don't see our effort and we don't see our speech only in the context of politics or work or church, but see it as part and parcel of a development process about who we are as people. That was the genius of Errol Barrow's mirror image speech. That was the promise of Grantley Adams's efforts to link together not just the political rights, but also the human and social rights, to be able to allow families across this country to be treated in a dignified way. How much more offsetting can it be than for somebody to determine that if you had to borrow money from them, that they should take back all that money from you in 2 or 3 weeks, and you must suck salt and don't eat food. And that's what he changed when he passed the legislation that stopped people in this country in the early 1950s from taking out of your salary more money than they could and than you would need in order to be able to live and to feed your family in this country. That's what he dealt with when he recognized that this body called the human body needs rest. The Bible told you that you need rest. But there are some people who believe that in the pursuit of profit, that they are to work people beyond the capacity. And I say so for fear that my cabinet might get upset with me. But their work is not the kind of work I'm talking about. But there was a time when people did not even know what it was to take a day off or to take a holiday year after year after year. And sometimes I'm saddened because I say to those of you who are here and to those who are not here but who are hearing my voice, have you told your children and your grandchildren how they have gotten where they have gotten? How they enjoy, Remy, what you enjoy today? Have you told them that they have not just landed so without people coming and exhibiting courage and the ability to speak truth to power and the ability to bear the brunt of sacrifice in order to stand for principle? Because principles, as you hear me say over and over, only mean something when it is inconvenient to stand by them. I have come to you today to tell you that this is a long walk. Yes, it is. And it seems to be an appropriate phrase having been used by all in the last week. It's a long journey. Don't fool yourself. Don't fool yourself. But a long journey does not stop you from remaining focused. And it is for that reason that on the first day, less than 1 week after we won, I said, and to those who believe that this is an IMF program, that is a lot of gobbledygook. It is a lot of nonsense. Because we determined that we were going to craft the program that best suited the people of Barbados and what we could bear. And I say to you, my dear, that just as you intend to learn from us, we learned from those who went before. And we learned that the adjustments in 1974 to 76 and the adjustments in 1981 to 82 and the adjustments in 1990 and 91 were all on the backs of the workers. You, each and every one of you. And if the truth be told, for 18 months I gathered an economic team in the opposition office. And week by week by week by week, we crafted a program. We didn't have any conversation with the IMF, but we crafted a program recognizing that yes, we could not absolve all of the workers from pain because the depth to which the country had sunk was way too deep. If you are a bad diabetic and you don't take care of the wound on your foot or your hand or whatever for a while, what happens? You run a risk not sometimes only of losing the digit or the limb. You run a risk of sepsis. And if you go back into your archives media, you will find that I gave this speech over and over and over and over in the last 4 or 5 years, recognizing that the hole to which we had jumped in was just getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and nobody was stopping it. And many of you in the workers' movement and across the private sector would shake your heads. Many a speech from this platform on a May Day spoke to that reality. So that we knew that the condition would be involving some pain. But it was our duty to minimize the pain and to be able to allow persons to recover as quickly as possible. And having learned from the examples of Sir Roy and others before him, we determined that this adjustment this time had to be borne not just by the workers, but by others who were as much a part of the crisis being created as anybody else. The banks and the insurance companies had made billions of dollars, combined over $3 billion in profits over the course of that 10-year period when the country started to flip. They were not called upon, Clyde, in 1991 when you were there. They were not called upon in 1981 to 82 to share in the burden. They were not called upon previously. But this government, and this Barbados Labour Party government in particular, conscious of the legacy of Grantley Adams, conscious of the shoulders upon which we stand, determined that I would not know how to look at you and to ask you to carry the burden for people who felt it was possible to continue to lend money to a government that was spending it like how a crack addict uses coke. You become complicit. And all of us know that if you see a paro in the community and you see somebody feeding that paro, you believe that that person feeding the paro is as guilty as the paro themselves, not just for the act of addiction, but for the consequences of that addiction with respect to stealing from people and abusing people in the homes in which they live. This is real talk today because this is a real day for real workers. Tony, I come in. But I could not let this day pass because you have a duty to go home, each and every one of you, and to tell your children, your grandchildren, your nephews, your nieces, it's not only about coming out in the thousands to Buju. I am on the front line like you in Buju, but I am on the front line here with workers' rights too. And a people that loses their memory, that doesn't understand how they got where they have gotten, are a people who are at risk of being exploited and being used against their will. So I have come here today to tell you that let those who want to talk, talk. Just as you are interested in the country's stability and development, and work as partners, all of you that I see in this audience, as partners, not in a political party, but for a political movement in the post-independence Caribbean that says that those people who have been the hewers of wood and the drawers of water, and those who have been exploited by political systems not crafted in our part of the world, that the days for that are over. And whether it is BLP, DLP, GLP, KLP, or any other LP that come about, and I hear one might be coming, whether it is any of us, we have a solemn duty not just to allow you to have decent work, but to allow you to be the owners of capital as well, to be enfranchised. And that's what Frank Walcott and Grantley Adams and Hugh Springer fought for as well. Not just for decent work, but you should be able to save and you should be able to participate in the benefits in this economy. And I believe that in the same way we have come to do better to be the best with respect to not carrying and allowing you to carry the brunt of the adjustment, that we have come also to do and to work with you to educate our people in financial literacy, to allow our people to know that cash earned mustn't just be frittered away, that cash earned must be invested, so that the same people who could build this house, and even when they sell it, the family and the estate benefit from the value. The same people who can build enterprises. I don't believe that people started big. I am not too old or too young. I remember a lot of things. I remember when Kiffin Simpson had a car sales room. It wasn't in Warrens when I was a child. It was short there on this road. He didn't start big. I remember when men like Leo Leacock were being built up in this country. He started as a messenger. And look where he was able to amass wealth and to leave to his two sons, both of whom are in the financial services sector and in the construction industry. And I can go on and name names, but I don't want to do that because I want you to leave here tonight, brethren and sistren, with an understanding that no matter how much I want it, or the cabinet want it, or the general secretary want it, it can't happen alone. And this notion that you can respect enjoyment but don't respect the things that make you powerful is something that we have to change in this country. We have to understand that life is about balance. And the balance comes in our ability to retrain and empower, to retool and enfranchise. That's what the RERE program is going to be about. Because you know it and I know it, we have allowed our slip to show a little too much in this country. And we've allowed it to show from the level of institutions, to the level of the private sector, to the unions even, to the workers even, and to the political parties as well. You're not perfect. And I don't get upset when people criticize. I use the criticism to make me better and to inspire the government to become better. And it is against that background that while we have done so many wonderful things, don't get me wrong, tell me how many other countries going into an IMF program gave the workers a 5% increase across the board as public servants. Tell me how many other countries took pensioners, non-contributory pensioners at the bottom of the scale and gave them a 45% increase on the eve of an IMF program when others said you couldn't do it. Right? Tell me how many other countries on the eve of an IMF program said that we are going to take our young people. Look at some of them in here today, bright, brimming with promise, and that they must have the right to go to the community college or the polytechnic or the university if they want to go, that they should not be denied by the circumstances of their birth. Tell me how many other countries on the eve of an IMF program said that in the same way we can waive taxes for people from overseas, we can take $10 million a year and put it in a trust loan program to lend ordinary Bajans $500, $1,500, $5,000. Tell me how many other countries on the eve of an IMF program had to do all of that and still have to contend to go and look to buy buses that had not been bought. Not one. Not a single one in 10 years. Not 10 months. 10 years. Or garbage trucks. 10 years. I say to you, my friends, that this is not an exam. It's life. And life we do some things very well, and we need to do some things better. And I have come here today to tell you as workers that I hear you, and I feel the pain, because many of you will be compromised if we don't get the public transport situation corrected, and we intend to do so. Yesterday, the chairman resigned, and I accepted it through my minister. I have asked Ian Gooding-Edgell, who is a former chairman of the Transport Board and who is more than capable of meeting the obligations and the task of chairman, to do and to accept that position, and he has agreed. And I expect, therefore, that he will work with the board with immediate haste to help correct this unfortunate situation. But I want to remind us that we didn't get there so, and that any government that presided over, according to them, in 2008, September, they had over 250 buses. And we inherited just over 50 buses working. But at the same time, we saw the number of privately owned permits in this country move from 500 to 750. And in the meantime, you at the Workers' Union would know that your debt at UCAL went from next skin to nothing to over $20 million at the same time that there were less buses and more buses to be repaired and more debt knocking about the place. We are more than capable of solving these problems. And I have asked the board and the new chairman, along with the chairman and board of the Transport Authority, to work route by route by route by route with the public and private resources, because our obligation is to make sure that buses run to time, buses run to route, and that we help those who need the most help as they go forward in paying the bus fares. We heard you, and we provided the discounts that would give you the opportunity on a volume basis to go back from $3.50 to $3. We heard you, and we also recognize that we need to make sure that children going on the ZRs and the other privately owned minibuses could pay $2.50, because the government does not pay to them unless they are going to come into the Transport Augmented Program. But we've gone further. And in addition to the 40 or so buses that have now, and privately owned transport vehicles or so, that are now coming into the program, we are going to go route by route by route to see how best to mobilize and to utilize those buses to provide that affordable, reliable transport that Barbadian workers and people deserve and will get under my government. And we will also, recognizing that we don't have the luxury of being able to increase our debt as a government to buy buses, we will also work with the privately owned people who come into the Transport Augmented Program, the TAP program, by giving you duty-free access to buses, even though you will have to pay the VAT with respect to them. So you will not pay the import duties so long as you work with the Transport Board in order to be able to deliver that transport system. And what does that private person get, therefore? They get the benefit of a duty-free bus, because not only has the government not renewed its fleet, but the majority of those privately owned ones who are coming into our program would not have renewed their fleet. They get the benefit of the Transport Board paying for the fares of pensioners, paying for the fares of school children, and paying for the fares of policemen in uniform. And they, by extension, will pay a small percentage to the Transport Board to run as a Transport Board designated bus as we go forward. We believe that this is workable. And while it will take time to roll out across the entire country, because even in the purchase of new buses, there is no part of the world you can go and sit down and buy 20 or 30 buses because they are made to order in today's world. People don't keep stock. And it is against that background, therefore, my government will work to do better, to make sure that you, the workers, are in a better situation when we meet next year this time with respect to the delivery of reliable, affordable public transport in Barbados. But there are other things that we need to do, and I will not keep you much longer. But workers have to recognize, as well as managers of capital, that if we don't change how we do business in a world that is fueled by technology, we are going to be left behind. And I look forward, therefore, to speaking at the International Labour Organization later this year, and also to pay tribute to Sir Roy Trotman as we do that, as they celebrate their centenary anniversary. Because they, like us, recognize that this thing called technology is changing how all of us function in the world, and is making some jobs redundant and some jobs obsolete. And it is against that background that we have to repurpose and re-engineer what we do. You can't wait for the event to end up on you and then say, oh shoot, what are we going to do with the people? We have to work it out and plan and retrain and retrain and retrain. So when I say to you that the whole of Barbados becomes a university and a training campus for the next 4 years, believe you me, but the social partnership has gone one step further. And we have asked for 2 papers, both of which we have, the early ones, and now they're strengthening in certain respects. One on the structure of work in Barbados, both in the public and private sector, and 2, one on pensions, because unless we get this issue of pensions right, we stand to not only affect workers, but affect the capacity of the state to be able to sustain what its obligations are to your young children as they become older. And we don't intend for them to be put at risk in this country. So over the course of the next 12 months, my government will work with the social partners to settle on the appropriate compact and legislation to deal with the structure of work. Some of you should not have to say that you want a sick day or that you want a vacation day to do something that is family driven. You should be able to have lieu days. And you should be able to have up to 5 lieu days in this country. Because as human beings, we all have obligations to ourselves and to our family that go beyond sickness, that go beyond the rest that you need, that Grantley fought for you. Similarly, my government has announced, and I'm waiting for the National Insurance Scheme to do it, that we will give paternity leave, starting with 2 weeks, to men in this country. Because we understand the importance of men bonding with their children. But we also understand that there has to be discipline in how the paternity leave is managed. Enough said at this moment. So my friends, I want to wish all of you a happy Workers' Day. But I want you to leave here not only committed to be doing better so that we can be the best that we can be. The message doesn't really change. And when I said it to the little children at St. Stephen's Infants, or on Monday, as I wore, this is my Heroes' Day, Workers' Day flag. I use it as a scarf and a flag. But when I said to the little 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It has to be the motto not just of little children. It has to be the motto of managers. It has to be the motto of workers. It has to be the motto of leaders. It has to be the motto of families. And secondly, many hands make light work. I keep saying, what lies ahead of us cannot be achieved by one or two alone. But young man, as you said at the end of your speech, collectively, together, we can move mountains. Together, we can become the best that we can be. But when we have some here and some there and some everywhere, we don't get there. And in the spirit of the union movement, and in the spirit of the conquest of workers against centuries of exploitation, against centuries of humiliation, workers only in the last 100 years became the most powerful that they could be across this world because they stood how? United. And they didn't stand united only within their own union. They stood united across unions. Because it is only in being able to have that unity of purpose, to accept that help is needed to fight large battles, to accept that working together as one, we can move mountains and remain faithful to the purpose that we can simply do better always to be the best that we can be. God bless you, the workers of this country. God bless Barbados, and may our journey continue. It is long, but it is ours to conquer. God bless you.